It's been an extraordinary 7 days, really, hasn't it? I mean, last week I urged the Prime Minister to stand up for Australians at the G7 fora, the various meetings he was going to be in. And I got to say, frankly, he has delivered. The Prime Minister wasn't fazed by any of the company he actually kept. He's kept his own counsel against all these crazy European pressures on climate change, only because they're making all this money out of people buying climate credits and all this sort of stuff. But he's kept his cards close to the chest. That's at least the right thing. Good on you, PM. He's also secured support from most G7 leaders over the Indo-Pacific security issues and, of course, our concerns over China. And he's delivering a free trade agreement between us and post-Brexit Britain. And, of course, if Britain couldn't, as Peter Credlin said the other day, deliver a free trade agreement with Australia, there'd be something awfully wrong. But crazier things have happened. So for Scott Morrison, it's been a very successful trip overseas. Well done. But by contrast, the Prime Minister has some big trouble here at home. And some of the states are now completely out of control. The state premier's completely out of control. And the PM needs to actually bring the same kind of Team Australia unity that he took to the G7 back in vogue here in Australia, because we're not in this pandemic thing together. We haven't been from the beginning, I don't think. Elites getting one treatment, sports stars getting another, and average everyday Australians not being able to. And so many people have been through so much personal pain as a result of a decision by, say, a chief health officer who thinks dinner in Canberra is okay. Who cares whether Victorians can't go any more than 25 kilometres? He had a dinner to go to. Of course, then there's the ageist rollout of this coronavirus vaccine. And there's plenty of people over the age of 60 tonight who are feeling concerned that they're actually expendable, that they're lab rats for a vaccine that might have side effects. Hundreds of people who've been affected with blood clots, some have died. No one's died of COVID since, October, except for that poor bloke who came out of Papua New Guinea. But of course, there's multitudes of confused messages from these so-called and often highly overpaid state health experts. And frankly, and what the government needs to understand is there's a buyer's strike. It's got nothing to do with supply. It's a buyer's strike amongst many of us. States aren't rewarding anyone for getting vaccinated. They still want to close borders at will. And in Queensland's case, they now want to bring in an entry application permit process, which I think is unconstitutional. They want you to apply for permission, even if you're a Queenslander, to come to this state. And of course, then there's the failure of Queensland and Western Australia's governments to loudly disclose the fine print of the COVID apps they say we all have to have when we visit various places. Mark McGowan says, it's not a big deal. The data won't be kept for long, but the data is actually being collected and administered by Amazon and Microsoft. Hardly encourages confidence about personal security when big tech knows where you've been and how long you were there. But of course, this nexus between international commerce and each of us is pretty hard to disconnect. But given that the big G7 discussion centred around and set up the Biden-Putin summit on the use of data, the issue of data breaches by international criminal elements, just how ignorant, how arrogant, how provincial are these state premiers? We all know that Victoria sold their soul to Beijing. They failed their citizens through a corrupted hotel quarantine process, which just killed hundreds. And tonight, there are some districts in the great state of Victoria that are in the Stone Age. They've got no power, they've got no water, and won't have power for weeks following some major storms in the eastern parts of Melbourne and outskirts. And what about the West Australian Premier's criticism of our own Prime Minister? Ramped up concerns about our various national sovereignty being challenged by China. Mark McGowan is being praised by Beijing for trying to undermine our Prime Minister ahead of the G7 summit. I mean, these states aren't acting in our national interest at all. Now, the Prime Minister is certainly not looking for a stoush with the states. I get it. But what do they actually need to do before he takes them on? It is a worrying time in the world, and I recognise there's a balance which Scott Morrison actually brings. You know, Peter Dutton's the hawk. He's backing our troops. He's talking about being prepared just in case. And he's taking on those cashed-up bureaucrats in Canberra who are all but comatose at Defence Headquarters. But ScoMo has been more of a dove, looking for peace with the premiers and rightly recognising that most of us don't want a political fight right during a pandemic. But some of these premiers now seem not as a dove but as a bit of a pigeon. Scott Morrison is inspired by the teachings of Jesus Christ. He turns his cheek a hell of a lot. But as the Gospel of St Matthew, amongst others, outlines, Jesus also became angry enough one day to turf out the buyers and the sellers in a synagogue. So in many ways, Scott Morrison's generosity towards the premiers has been exploited by them. And some premiers seem to actually forget they are Australians. But at least we have a Prime Minister who is Australian, first and foremost. Keen to know what you think. #Hardgrave if you want to send me a tweet. We'll read out the ones that are publishable, if you know what I mean, or you can write to me directly, gary.hardgrave@skynews.com.au.